Police in Somalia have announced a 33-hour curfew in the capital Mogadishu ahead of tomorrow's presidential election. Members of parliament will choose the next president at a heavily guarded Air Force hangar in Mogadishu. Somalia was supposed to choose a new leader in February 2021. But they missed that deadline as its political leaders squabbled over the election process. The impasse turned violent when the incumbent, Mohammed Abdullahi, extended his term in what critics called an unconstitutional power grab. He's facing challenges from 36 other candidates, including 2 former presidents. Well, for more analysis on this, we're now joined by African security analyst Abdullahi Boru Halakhe. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, my brother. Always good to talk to you.
Always good to be on SABC, my brother.
All right. So, I mean, when you say presidential elections, it's usually a big event and one that signifies the start of something significant. But in Somalia, it's a very special case. And I want to start with how you even get to the presidential election, because much of what will happen tomorrow happens before, doesn't it?
No, pretty much. I think because of Somalia's unique history, and Somalia has not had universal suffrage, one woman, one man vote. The last time they had was in 1969. And so, as part of the peace process that restored what we now currently experience, stability, Somalia now uses direct elections. So the way it works is the clan elders elect the delegates who will then elect the members of the lower house, and the 7 federal member states then also elect their delegates to the upper house. And so the 2 houses that is formed as a product of federal member states and the clan elders both then elect the president. And these numbers, it's largely less than 330. I think it's 329. These are the people who will elect the president, and then the president appoints the prime minister, and the prime minister then runs the affairs of the government. Ideally, this works, if it works. And the current president, when he came into power, I think in 2017, was meant to prepare the ground for universal suffrage. When a country doesn't have a centralized ID system, when the boundaries between some of these member states are contested, when there is a tension between the federal member states and Mogadishu, then it becomes fairly complicated. And as a result, I think that tension led to the parliament moving a vote of no confidence against the previous prime minister, Khaire. And then we have a new prime minister, and the tension between him and the president is simmering up to this time too.
39 candidates. I mean, does that mean every clan has sent someone?
Yeah, pretty much. Somalia has a fairly robust, debates about some of these candidates, and some of them are candidates that we know, and their records, what they've done in office is of public record. And I think it is not a manifestation of, tremendous amount of interest and leadership and service. Rather, it is just people wanting to get into power. And some of them are not their own. Some of them are candidates that are planted, obviously. But like you said at the top, this election is being held at an airport. The previous election was held at an airport hangar. So I think it just shows that there is a need for Somalia to have stable, well-functioning government. But now here we have a delegate that is sitting and deciding the fate of the country and there are less than 330. So the idea that we have the number of candidates running is not an indication of robustness or the utility of some of these candidates, but rather it is just the desire for people to be seen to run for office without clearly any legitimate, public service interest at heart.
So the clans nominate people who sit in this parliament. The person who's going to win this election, is this the person who's done a lot of the negotiations behind the scene and horse trading and putting almost together a coalition?
It is practically that. There is a formula also. I didn't want to get into the weeds of 4.5. That is the major clans and one of the minor and another minor clans. But the thing is, it is also the fact that your negotiation skills, your ability to engage in horse trading, that you give me this, I'll be able to give that. That is actually at the heart of this Somalia's election. Here you have, a fairly modern country by any imagination of, if we use a country that has a national anthem, a flag, and all that kind of paraphernalia that goes with a country being named a country. But this formula is also very unique and traditional and indigenous, if you will. But the ability to be able to convince all these little moving pieces makes it incredibly intricate. However, we've got to also acknowledge that it is not just a Somalia affair. There are various external actors that are not domestic to Somalia that are really interested in the outcome. The Gulf countries, particularly Qatar, exercises an outsized role in how elections are held in Somalia. I think during the last election, they supported Farmajo, that is Qatar, and the previous election, they also supported another candidate that won, actually. And none of the Somalia's presidents so far has served more than one term. So in fact, the current president is going against the grain, against history, trying to break that. And that requires not just negotiations that I've spoken about, it also needs a ton of money, some of it not necessarily generated inside Somalia.
The person who will win this election, will they be a genuine president of this country? Given Al-Shabaab, given Al-Shabaab and the amount of control, influence that the insurgents have in the country, what will they actually be ruling?
That is a very important question, and I'm glad you've asked, Peter, because what defines, a country? We say it has a flag, it has a national anthem, but if you cannot project force over that geographical unit, then it becomes a really difficult question. It's a question that comes up particularly around Somalia, when one of its member states, Somaliland, that wants to be a country, has had all its municipal elections and all manner of stuff. The only thing that they don't have is their own currency and all manner of stuff that goes with being a state, and is not allowed to be a state. And that, I think, is a problem of, the founding charter of the OAU that transitioned to African Union. It becomes very difficult. In name, all right? In name, that person will be the president. They will have a seat at African Union. They will have a seat at the UN. They will be able to enter into treaties and negotiations and all manner of stuff. But do they really control the country outside the symbolic, villa in Mogadishu? In terms of delivery of service, education, health, collection of, trash and sewerage facilities that goes with the traditional function of the state, that they do not have. Over the last 15 years, the primary source of security was the African mission in Somalia, that is AMISOM, that has transitioned now into African Transitional Mission in Somalia, ATMIS. So in many ways, symbolically, yes, he will be the president, but in the daily operation of the country, I don't think he, because most of them are I don't think will be able to exercise that role. And that is why, interest from all these other countries, some African, some outside Africa, makes Somalia's election a fairly tense affair.
Okay, let's assume it is a he. a lot of people point to Abdullahi Mohammed for the delay in getting us to this point. If he doesn't win, will he accept the result?
That's a good question, but I think he will have no option. That is why he's deploying every tool in his toolbox to get elected. He definitely bears a great deal of responsibility for the delay in the elections. And I think there are also, it has to be said, member countries, the troops contributing countries, largely most of them from the region, particularly Kenya and Ethiopia, have not played a positive role that they should, particularly in terms of the domestic politics of Somalia. For instance, during the last election for the Jubaland president, one of the federal member states, Ethiopia and Kenya took separate sides, and it led to tremendous amount of tension. You know, the current president of Jubaland used to be a member of Al-Shabaab, but Kenya, have thrown their weight behind him, and Ethiopia opposed him, and he had tension because there is general tension between federal member states and Mogadishu over, resources and power. And, troops contributing countries have also contributed to some of the tension that led to the postponement, because for Mogadishu, it looks at some of the troops contributing countries as a source of problem, where they use AMISOM as a leverage to influence the domestic politics inside Somalia. And so I think there is that, but I think without a doubt, he takes the lion's share of the blame in the delay of the elections, because April 2021, making the parliament to pass the extension of 2 years, not just his term, but also the parliament's term. I don't think it did well in entrenching what is already a fragile electoral politics.
All right, so President Mohammed, President Farmajo, if he doesn't win, who is the most likely next name that might come through?
Another former president. Another former president. And that is the problem with Somalia as it is currently. The current crop of leaders or politicians that Somalia has are not people actually who should lead the country. The previous president before Farmajo, who now is also in the running, his called is Mohammed, the challenge with him is he doesn't have a great deal of record to run on. There are certain things that he did, there are certain, mistakes, there are certain, things that were fairly egregious, including caught in the crossfire of disposing of some of the properties of the Somalia government in foreign embassies, one of it being in the United States. So I think the roster of leaders or politicians that have come up to run for this election doesn't engender a tremendous deal of legitimacy and trust from the people. But again, the challenge is, if these elections were to be held through universal suffrage, I don't think most of them will make it. But because they're very good at making deals and cutting deals, and because they are able to, raise tremendous amount of money, because buying, over half of 329 delegates, even if you include everything, it's not such a huge ask compared to going to every little hamlet to go and ask for votes.
Are you hopeful for Somalia? I mean, most people will say Siad Barre was extreme, he was a dictator,
yes,
but there was stability, yes, and ever since then, yes, actually things fall, yes, apart. Are there any signs, any shoots that you can point to that suggest that a better day is coming?
I'm always hopeful. I mean, I always tell myself, I might be, an eternally optimistic person. And I think for me personally, it is a country with tremendous amount of potential. And one thing that I really hope, is that the ATMIS, that is African, Transitional Mission in Somalia, doesn't suffer from the same problems that plagued the AMISOM.
Right.
And I would want to speak to three of them. Some of them I've mentioned in passing, and one of them is really the financing of the ATMIs. I think that is predictable and sustainable. I hope that will be done, because the challenge right now is, for the last 15 years, the EU Peace Fund has really paid for almost all of the stipend for the soldiers that were fighting Al-Shabaab in Somalia. And beginning this year, EU has transitioned from that. AU is no longer the only primary recipient for peacekeeping operations on the continent. The EU now will be able to do that even bilaterally. That means that the funding that ATMIS gets will be small. The African Union Peace Fund that was endowed to a tune of a few million, needs to be wrapped up, without which they will not be able to fight Al-Shabaab. I think those are the challenges, one primary challenge. And the other one is the challenge between, the tension between the federal member states and Mogadishu. I'm just hoping that these elections are held and we have an outcome, and the outcome that people agree with, and then that probably will bring down the temperature. And then in the next election, hopefully, to have a universal suffrage, because Somalis their affairs shouldn't be governed by 329 delegates to determine their fate or their presidency. I think that, to me, gives me some comfort. As difficult as it is, for me, this election had to happen. Further delaying the elections would only increase the political temperature in the country, and that is not something that you want to see. The delay from last year to this year in and of itself was unnecessary. There are far more important issues in Somalia right now. If you look at the humanitarian crisis that is approaching both Ethiopia, Somalia, and parts of northern Kenya, that needs a government in place that external actors can work with, through which they can distribute some of the desperately dire needed humanitarian aid. So I think having the election, for me, symbolically, would be a useful step. Then what people will ask, should we just have the election or wait until we have a better election? My rule always is, let's not make perfect the enemy of the good. I'd rather have a poor election than not have an election at all.
Abdullahi, let's keep our fingers crossed, because actually at the end of the day, it's about the people that really are desperate for a better future. Yes. And let's just hope that somehow they find their way. Thanks so much indeed. Your insights always greatly appreciated, my brother. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother. Take care.
All right, that's Abdullahi Boru Halakhe, who's one of our regular commentators, sharing his thoughts on the Somalia elections taking place tomorrow. Again, it's one of these elections that is not direct, much like that we have here, but a lot of voting has taken place in the clans around the country, and those representatives now are the ones that will be voting at an airport hangar tomorrow, and this is behind a 33-hour curfew. We'll keep on top